Would you like to play some football?
Hey, welcome to another edition of Gridiron the Gospel, a faith and college football podcast. I'm George Schroeder, joined as always by Dean and Sarah, and we are excited to talk about the results of week 2 in college football and then look ahead a little bit to week 3. And then in the second half of the podcast, we'll do what we always do, and we're going to talk about our shared faith in Christ. But week 2 was supposed to be kind of a light week in college football. And one of the things I always say, Dean, is when you hear it's a light week, that's when you should look out, because that's when crazy things can happen. And we'll get to something weird that happened in Gainesville, Florida in just a second, just down the road from you. Oklahoma, Michigan at Oklahoma was the big marquee matchup of the week. Not that, we really knew what to make of either team, but obviously two of the top programs in college football history, kind of a helmet game type of thing if you love traditional uniforms and traditional programs. And it lived up to its billing in a lot of different ways. Oklahoma won 24-13. Dean, what did you think about the game in Norman?
Yeah, and I think you described it well. I think what drew people to the game was who was playing historically, right? The uniforms. People like to talk about blue bloods, clearly blue bloods. Everybody knows them by things like their fight songs. It's Hail to the Victors, it's Boomer Sooner. It's the famous coaches, Bud Wilkinson, and there's, Barry, obviously, and there's Schembechler, and all the way back. So it's just those kind of neat matchups that just fans love to see. I do think that the teams are not quite as good as their rankings are. I think we're ranking uniforms a little bit too. Even though Oklahoma, with the offensive coordinator, new quarterback, definitely look better. Look better on offense, especially, and they're going to be okay on defense with Venerables. I thought the game was kind of as expected, nothing too crazy. But it seemed like a great atmosphere and seemed like it was quite the game you want to be at. Like if you're a fan wanting to attend games, just like you're not invested in those teams, you just love college football. The games you want to go to are when Blue Bloods are playing, right? Like those are the great kind of fun things. So I'm glad that game was scheduled, and I love seeing games scheduled like that. How about you?
I do too. I mean, that's the thing, right? I guess this is an amazing stat that, and the ABC folks kept telling us it, so we know it now. But the only other time they had played was like a bowl game years and years ago, decades ago. And it's amazing they had never been scheduled against each other or been matched in a bowl game. But back in the old bowl system, if you win your league, you're going to go play somebody else. And, obviously if you're Michigan and you win your league at the time, you go to the Rose Bowl. So they would never have played. But it was kind of cool to see that. There's a couple things that I took. Well, let me ask you this. I hear what you're saying about maybe they're a little overrated going in. And I know you want to get to something about rankings here in a little bit, but which team did we learn more about in terms of whether they're overrated, underrated, whatever, Oklahoma or Michigan?
Yeah, so I don't think anyone's fully buying Michigan. I mean, this was a team that was pretty disappointing last year to the very end, when they had obviously the big win against Ohio State and then beat Bama in the bowl game. But to me, all eyes have been, from an Oklahoma perspective, on is the offense going to be better? Are they going to be probably the top rated? He and Carson Beck, the top quarterback transfers coming in terms of who are coveted, and then you have the new offensive coordinator is kind of do or die for Venerables. So to me, that was the story of the game. Is Oklahoma going to be better? And I think the answer is definitely yes. They're absolutely better than they were last year.
Yeah, John Mateer clearly
He's
has
great.
given them something different than they had last year when, Jackson Arnold was a guy, lost the job, and then they just really struggled offensively. Now, a lot of that had to do with a lack of receivers. They had so much injury at the receiver spot last year that it was different, but he definitely gives them something different. And you're hearing comparisons now, because this is what people do, to Baker Mayfield. And, I think if you want to talk about kind of playing with a chip on his shoulder or maybe lifting a team, I get that. I'd like to see more of his passing ability before I even begin to get to that. But because I think one of the things I did note was he throws some balls on a line that if he put a little air under them, could actually be completed, and they're not because he throws a ball on the line. Now, is that nitpicking? Absolutely. But are you trying to be the number one pick in the draft and a Heisman Trophy winner? And I know Baker Mayfield started as a walk-on, and nobody knew how good he was when he started that first year. And I don't know that he was that good when he started that first year, but it's interesting just to hear that. It's the other thing You keep talking about Brent Venables and the defense is a given. I can just tell you, having lived in Central Oklahoma for a while I was at USA Today, and watching the trials and travails they had defensively when Lincoln Riley had great offenses and was going to the 4-team playoff more often than not, but they couldn't stop anybody. It is probably, for all of my friends from Oklahoma, really exciting to see a defense that looks like it actually stops people. And he has done that for all the other things that have not gone well for Brent Venables. He has brought defense back to the program. And so that's a good thing to see. And I think we saw that. Now, on the Michigan side of things, Bryce Underwood, obviously the ballyhooed freshman, true freshman, won the job, big time recruit. You can see the physical ability that he has. And people got really excited when they played the first game against New Mexico. That's an outmatched opponent, and they came up against whatever Oklahoma ends up being, a very credible opponent. And he, on the road, tough environment, night game, and he looked a lot like a freshman to me, Bryce Underwood. That doesn't mean I don't think he's going to be really good. I think you can see all the tools, and so he has every chance to be really, really good and be what they want. But their offense was clunky, and some of it had to do with the quarterback. I don't think their O-line is as good as it could be either, but Bryce Underwood has a ways to go. And so it's not like Michigan is right back to sort of 2023 level Michigan either, but a great, great early season matchup. I will tell you this about Oklahoma. They've got maybe, at least as you look at the rankings, and we're going to get to that in a second, because I know you've got some thoughts on that. They've got maybe one of the tougher schedules in the country, and just in terms of the gauntlet they'll run in the SEC this year. And obviously, these giant bloated conferences, you can have a really tough schedule or a lighter schedule just because of how unbalanced it can be. And so some other programs don't sort of face the same gauntlet. If they had a little bit lesser schedule, I think you'd be looking at a team that could really have a huge bounce back year. I'm a big wait and see guy on this as it relates to, because of the schedule they have. So, but folks in Norman at least have all sorts of reason to be optimistic, where they didn't have that surely last year. So good stuff. The other thing that we teased at the top is Gainesville, where people thought Billy Napier had gotten the ship righted with the way they finished 2024. And they were all excited about Lagway at quarterback. They were all excited about what could happen this year. And then USF came into Gainesville.
The South Florida Bulls.
The South Florida Bulls, who... and they walked out of Gainesville winners on is it Nico Gramatica? Is he the nephew of Martin's
son?
Is it Martin's
Billy's
son?
nephew, Martin's son.
Yeah.
With the big field goal. They did a great job moving the ball down the field to set that up as well at the end there, and to give him a place to make a pretty easy kick. I saw the thing that I just can't stop thinking about concerning that game is back when they lost several years ago. I believe it was to LSU, and the guy threw the shoe and it gave him a penalty. It was spitting. This past game, it was spitting in the face of an opponent. That was a massive personal foul penalty.
2 days after you saw it happen in the NFL, too.
That's right.
Where the Eagle spit on or at Dak Prescott, you'd think you would at least have had sort of an object lesson from somebody else. Don't do that. Yeah, here's the thing too. Look, is that just one player going off the rails? Absolutely. But those are the kinds of things that lead people to believe, right or wrong, that a guy doesn't really have control of the program, that there's no discipline in the program, and that all these things are contributing to why they can't get it done on the field. Let me just put it this way. You lose to USF, even though I think USF, they blew the doors off of Boise, which was surprising to any of us who've watched college football. In week one, USF may be really good, but you lose to USF at home. Frankly, you lose to USF anywhere, but you lose to USF in Gainesville, and you're back on the hot seat. There's no question. And so what happens from Florida, how they rebound is going to be really important. One of the things he did last year was they didn't start well, and I thought he kept the team together, and then they got it going, and it sort of quenched all of the talk. But the question is going to be, do you hold on to the team? Do they respond well? And can you win games? Because otherwise, the Gator fans are not patient. And maybe we can say that about any fan base anywhere, right? But
they're definitely
Gator
not.
fans are not patient. And
what do you have with Lagway? That's what they don't know. And they thought maybe they had a Heisman candidate. They're basically, the state of Florida, Gator Nation was hysterical over Lagway. I mean, he was the next great thing, and just looked kind of okay. Missed some key throws. But Danny Cannell, I thought, had a great point in a post he did after all the games. He said, if your team lost, that's Michigan, whoever it might be, don't forget that Notre Dame looked terrible against Northern Illinois last year. Lost the game, second week of the season, I think it was, and then won out the rest of the year, went to the national championship again. That's the great thing about college football. That's the great thing about a 12-team playoff is no one's out of it yet.
No, that's exactly right. Now, you have a lot less margin for error.
Yes.
Maybe no margin for error, but I would say you have more than no margin for error because it's a 12-team playoff. There's at large bids to be had. There's a conference championship to play for. You didn't lose to a conference opponent, and so you didn't hurt yourself in the conference race. So there's a lot of different things you still got to play for. The question I think that you have to ask yourself is this who we are? Do we have to revise what we thought our ceiling could be? And that's what I think really alarms like Florida fans probably. So, all right. So USF, what should we be thinking about USF? Because on the one hand, if you're a Gator fan, it's inconceivable that you lose to USF. Keep in mind that Alabama went down there a couple of years ago and almost lost to USF in Tampa. Remember that, one of Nick's last teams. So they've been getting it going a little bit, but and it's so hard to even extrapolate from year to year to year because of the NIL and the transfer portal now. But they've been getting that program going. What are we to think of USF now after beating Boise like a drum and then going into the swamp and beating the Gators?
Even if they lose to Miami this week, I think they have a real opportunity. If you can be a one-loss group of 5 team and get in.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if that's possible, but this year, but only to run the table to get in. But they have a real shot at going to the playoffs. Here's the thing about USF: the first people that maybe live outside of Florida and don't pay attention to them need to know this is a state school, a large school that's recruiting Florida talent.
Mm-hmm.
But if you can just get great Tampa and Orlando, Lakeland, which is a very deep, rich area of high school football, you can just get that talent in the door. And then not even talk about the transfer portal and filling needs from other places. You're going to be a talented team. So to me, UCF, USF, they should always be competitive because the talent pool they get of kind of the second tier Florida guys who honestly would be higher tier in any other state, given a couple. So I think that they're well coached. I've even heard the USF coach, Golich, I've heard his name as the next UF coach, as a possibility. And they have players. They really do. And they're also starting to take football seriously. They're building an on-campus stadium. They play in the Buck Stadium right now, but they want to win. So Miami's on notice this coming week. Now, USF came out of the gate last year in the first half in Raymond James and gave Miami a scare for a minute. Miami wound up blowing them out. But Miami's definitely on notice for UCF this week. And they start American Conference play, and they are the front runner. It's them, Memphis. Our Army looked better. Even though they lost to Charleston State, they went and beat Kansas State. So we'll see what Army can do. Army just never know because their offense is just such a wild card. But I think USF is a legitimate top 15 football team, and they can compete with anybody.
All right, so USF has jumped into the polls, and let's see, they are now ranked 18th from not being ranked. Yep. 18 from not being ranked. That's in the AP Top 25, and they are 23rd in the coaches poll. But you've got a real issue with rankings that we were talking about before we got started on our extensive pre-show production. So let's talk about polls on September 8th, as we're recording a day late this week.
Well, I just think that it creates an unfair criteria. Because you can claim a top 10 win because somebody was ranked top 10 in week 2. And the only reason they're ranked top 10 in week 2 is because they were preseason, ranked high. Let's think about some things there. South Florida has wins against Boise State and Florida, which we would call 2 ranked wins, and they only go to 18. My question is, what are the polls based on? So they're only 18, but then you have like Texas A&M 16 ahead of them at 2-0. Why is Texas A&M ranked ahead of USF? What game did they win that qualifies that? What is Illinois ranked ahead of them because they beat Duke? Illinois at 9. I just don't understand that. And then you have University of Georgia. Do I think UGA beat USF? Sure. But what are the rankings based on? Who we think is the best or who has accomplished the most?
Well, that is what they're based on. Who we think is the best.
Which says who? That's the coaches. But half of them don't even do the voting themselves. Somebody fills them out for them. So it just drives me crazy. And then in the famous others receiving votes, Mississippi State just beat Arizona State, the defending Big 12 champion, and they're not ranked. But Indiana and Texas Tech and Utah are all 2-0, and they are. And Ole Miss. I just don't get it. I never
Yeah,
have
no,
got. That's
I
my
don't.
rant. It just drives me
Well,
crazy.
well, first of all, somebody decided they're going to do a poll, and so they did a preseason poll, and the problem I've always had with the polls is it sort of locks people into slots when they are voting, and also people just thinking about it into slots as they're thinking about programs, and so you'll have a team that comes from off the radar, and it's hard to get on the radar or move into the center of the radar or up the rankings, however you want to say it. Whereas you'll have teams that were highly thought of for whatever reason to start the year. It turns out they're not all that good, and it takes them forever to go down the rankings, even once you figured out that they're not that good.
Florida
And
State's 10.
some programs never
2-10.
figured that out about.
Florida State went from 2-10 to number 10 in the nation for beating Alabama. And now they're number 10. So now they count as a top 10 win for somebody if they beat them. It's just wild to me. Meanwhile, Mississippi State beats Arizona State and is unranked. So you have 10 and unranked. Georgia Tech wins at Colorado, who's a media darling and is unranked. It's just so strange to me how it works and who gets to move and what's considered a big win. And Notre Dame does not have a win in their top 10.
Yeah.
It's just a weird thing.
Well, Clemson is at Georgia Tech. We'll talk about that in a little bit, maybe. But and so Georgia Tech's got an opportunity there because Clemson somehow, after not looking very good against LSU and losing week 1, is still ranked 12th at 1-1. Here's the other thing too. Is it possible that LSU, which shot up the rankings, is now ranked right after Ohio State and Penn State at number 3? That we are going to overvalue that win over Clemson for a long time. I mean, I thought LSU looked really good, don't get me wrong, but how much of that was Clemson? And that's the problem with the early season nature of this stuff. It takes you to about mid-October before you really start to figure it out. And even then you can lock people in and they change over the second half of the season. There's no perfect way to do this. And I guess that's the problem. And the one thing about college football that's always been true, and unless you got to a complete NFL type structure, at which point it wouldn't matter what anybody did in terms of, like, who cares what NFL power rankings are, right? Your favorite writer does that or your favorite broadcaster does that. Nobody really cares because all you got to do is it's your record and what you look like in your division and stuff like that. I don't want to change college football into the NFL, but unless you go to that, there's always going to be some form of rankings and some form of the fact that college football is a matter of perception. And so what that means is the Ohio States of the world and the Oklahomas of the world and the Michigans of the world and the Alabamas of the world and the whoever else is of the world. And look, some of them have achieved and achieved and achieved, so they get it, but they start high. And sometimes you really don't know if they're going to be all that good or not. Now, I think Ohio State's really good. Don't get me wrong. So I'm not trying to pick on that. I'm just saying that we're familiar with the tradition of the helmet. And so it's a little bit like if you're a TCU fan or a Baylor fan, and there was the year in 2014, I want to say, that they were declared co-champions of the Big 12, and Ohio State got into the 4-team playoff from the Big 10 and then went and won it. So good for them. They proved their point. But there are a whole lot of people that would tell you that had that been a different helmet, that either TCU or Baylor would have gotten into the playoff, right? Because our perceptions are different. Is that fair? Is that unfair? I don't know. And obviously the strength of my argument goes way down when Ohio State wins the championship. But I do think there are people that will tell you that even in the selection committee room, even when you don't want to be biased, it's hard not to be unconsciously biased towards those programs that have been the marquee programs forever. And polls reflect that in a lot of ways, I think.
I think I'd be less cranky if the polls came out October 1st. Now, I know that will never happen, but if the first release is October 1st, I'd be less cranky.
So the one thing I would tell you is I wish that, and we'll get into this as we get further in the season, and you probably heard me say this before, but I wish the selection committee would not do the weekly rankings that they do, that are made for TV rankings. I wish that they would just do a final ranking, but I do appreciate the fact that they wait until the end of October, essentially every year, somewhere, depends on how the calendar falls, to start ranking teams. And if you wanted to do just the one at the end of October or sometime at least midseason or a week or two after, and then come back and do a final, I wouldn't have any issue with the selection committee at all in their rankings. I just don't like the made for TV nature of it, because I actually think that creates, even in a 12-team playoff, a little bit of a locked in mentality among those members and certainly among the public. But I do think they got that part right. So I agree with you. I'd love to see, if you're going to do polls, wait until sometime in October. The problem is nobody's going to do that, right?
I'm not
It's
going
just,
to do that. Oh, I know. That's not changing.
if the AP and the coaches said we're going to start October 1 or whatever the equivalent date is, somebody else would come in and do it, right?
Did you have an
So
AP vote, George?
I did it one time. It's been years and years and years. Way back when I did it 1 year, maybe 2 years. It was what's interesting about that is this: you're covering, at that point I was covering OU football. That was before I went to might have been covering Oregon as a columnist, but it was before I went to USA Today. And so you're at one game. Now, this is even true if you're at USA Today. You're at one game. Now, you're trying to cover the whole country and understand what's going on more than you are. But when you're covering a program, like say when I was the Oklahoma beat writer for the Oklahoma City paper, the Oklahoman, you're focused in on that team. And then you finish that game, you finish all the things you've got to do, and you file all your reports and stories and things like that. And now you've sort of kept up with what's going on, but now late Saturday night, early Sunday morning, you're trying to create and craft a top 25. And there's a lot of guys who are in the same type of role, who are those people that are the writers and broadcasters who constitute the panel for the AP poll. And I think they really try hard to get it right, but you're not really sitting back and watching TV on the multi-view, all day long, at which point maybe you get a better look at it. So I always found it to be difficult for me and hard not to just be locked in on where the poll was, last week in my thought process. And I don't mean where the poll ended up, but what my vote was last week. So
yeah, I was wondering that experience, what it'd be like, because you do have a deadline, you got to crank it out. You hear about coaches that have a director of ops fill it out for them, or somebody like that. It's just an interesting process. I just think it's a little outdated with the way the games change. Now there's a playoff, and I know it's not going to go anywhere, but I'm just not a fan.
no, I get it. I can tell, and I love that. All right, so let's go. There's another team at the top of the polls, or near the top of the polls, and that's Oregon. And there's a team that won't be on anybody's radar in terms of voting, and that's Oklahoma State. And Mike Gundy's been at Oklahoma State for a long time. He's done a lot of really good things there. They had a 3-9 year last year where they lost, I think, their last 9. They did not win a single Big 12 game. He blew up the staff. They've got essentially everybody's new on staff except him. They brought in a bunch of guys from the portal and hoping to be better this year. And then going into game week, a tough scheduled game at Eugene, he starts talking about how Oregon has all these NIL advantages because they have more money than Oklahoma State. At which point I have no sympathy for you, because here's the deal. That's just life in the big city. And
Sure.
also, by the way, yes, Oregon has lots of resources and they're committed to football. And yes, they have Nike or Phil Knight, but you used to have Boone Pickens. And back when it was all about facilities, he built you a Taj Mahal and he gave you a giant boost of money. I don't remember what it was, 15, 16, 17 years ago, for the school, that changed the game for them and gave them the ability to compete at a much higher level than they've been able to. And so to act like, you've never had that sort of advantage is crazy. But then he makes those points, or he thought they were points, and then they go out and they get crushed 69-3. It was something like that. I think that was the third quarter score. I don't think Oregon scored in the fourth quarter. They definitely slowed things down and played everybody they could play at that point. And it's like that's what you expect when, East Popcorn State comes into one of these power programs. For that to happen with Oklahoma State, I got to be honest with you. I mean, who knows where they go from here, but I don't even care about. We can talk about Oregon down the road. I think they look pretty good, but I just got to be honest with you. Oklahoma State is in a world of hurt, and it's long past time to talk about whether Mike Gundy is on the way out. He barely survived last year, and now they look like this. You can't. It's one thing to lose in Eugene. It's another thing to look like this and to have made the comments you made, which may have been poking the bear, but regardless, you just got drilled and you were completely non-competitive. And I guess maybe if they have some great turnaround that we don't expect, but I don't expect it.
He's toast. Yeah. I mean, Mike Gundy really is, probably the most historic, not biggest name. That'd be Barry Sanders, but most like historic and face in the history of Oklahoma State football. He was Barry
Yeah.
Sanders' quarterback.
He was a
And
really,
a good
really
one.
good
And a
quarterback.
good
Yeah.
one. That was a great
Not a
team in
great one,
'88
but
they had.
really, really good
But
one. Mm-hmm.
yeah, with Hartley Dykes and Barry Sanders and him, and then because been the coach in most people's memory since Les Miles, right? Les Miles was the head coach, and he left to go to LSU. So it's been Mike Gundy ever since. I mean, I think most people, especially people my age, don't even remember Mike Gundy not being the head coach of Oklahoma State. But the game has changed, and when you start complaining about all the NIL stuff, it means you're on the way out. I mean, that's the new excuse everyone's going to make. I mean, even AJ McCarron after Florida State beat Alabama was yelling about money. It's like, Alabama, seriously, really? But and then, Florida State's always like, we have no money. Like, it's just kind of the new excuse. Like, anytime you lose, that's going to be the thing now in college football. But for Oklahoma State, a historic program like that, to go and get absolutely annihilated after you've been complaining as well, it's just the writings on the wall. I think this is Gundy's last season. I don't wish that for him, but I think this is it. I wouldn't be surprised if you see maybe not 3-9, but in that realm, like in that ballpark again. And I think this will be it. So that'd be an interesting coaching search to see who the modern day Oklahoma State can actually land.
Well, that's a
head
problem.
coach.
Yeah, that's a
Maybe
problem
you
too.
get it.
And he wasn't helped when one of his sons, Gavin Gundy, had a tweet thread afterward that is incendiary. If you haven't seen it, probably go find it. I don't know if it got deleted or not, but you can find it lingering on the internet, where he essentially said a lot of things that are correct, but which are going to be completely unhelpful to Mike Gundy. Things like Mike Gundy is the program, he's the winningest coach, and this, that, and the other. Agreed. But you're not helping. You're actually hurting. You're making it worse. And there is going to be a be careful what you wish for thing. But at this point, you can't go 3-9 and not win a game in the Big 12. And by the way, a Big 12 where Oklahoma and Texas were gone, and you thought you might be able to rule the roost. They legitimately thought that, and I think they seemed like that made sense to me at the time. They could be one of those programs that could become the consistent top or near the top. And you go 3-9, don't win a game, and now you look really, really bad. If they don't look, that said, they're not going to face anybody like Oregon in the Big 12 this year. Now, are they going to beat some teams in the Big 12? Maybe, probably, but are they going to beat the top teams? I don't think so.
Yeah, not enough. I guess they'll hire a Power 5 coordinator. That's probably their range now. Get a Power 5 DC or OC.
Yeah, and Power 4 is what we're looking for here
Power
too.
4,
by the way,
sorry,
just because as much as I appreciate what Oregon State and Washington State are trying to do in reconstituting the Pac-12, I mean they've added Dallas Baptist in baseball, and
which is a good addition for baseball. But
it's a great addition for baseball, but it's not. None of that is helping. None of what you've been able to do is going to help you for football, sadly, in terms of at least not being a Power 5 back to the original status. So
Power 4 is our new lingo.
All right, a couple quick things. Iowa State beats Iowa. Iowa's offense didn't look any different, even though it was going to be. Yeah. But Matt Campbell's, got it going at Iowa State. They actually look pretty good. And I appreciate his ability to build a program at a place that really nobody's ever built a program. The upset of the week, probably, I don't know if it's an upset or not, because, we're just going off of last year. And I do think Sam Leavitt's a good quarterback, but Mississippi State went 2-10 a year ago, beats Arizona State, and they were up 16-0, lost the lead, and then they calmly throw a touchdown pass in the final minute, like a long touchdown pass to win it, and the Cowbells went crazy. I don't think that we're talking about a bowl eligible team in Mississippi State, but at least they look like they're going to be credible. So good for them, and who knows what that means for Arizona State or anybody else. But it's a bad loss for the Big 12. Let's put it that way. So
yeah, I thought you thinking Dillingham was kind of building something, and Mississippi State should have been one of those guaranteed wins. I mean, I think they crushed them last year, in Tempe. And if you're trying to build a program of consistency, not just a one and done flash in the pan 1 year wonder, you can't lose to Mississippi State.
That's right.
Yeah.
All right, couple quick ones. Baylor, after that loss to Auburn in the first week, then wins at a ranked, and that takes us back to our previous conversation, SMU, which of course was a playoff team last year. It is a really good win. Won 48-45 in double overtime after really not, their first lead was in the first overtime, if I'm correct. I mean, they were down
2 scores at one point. They were down
two scores with 8 minutes left, and 2 touchdowns with 8 minutes left, scored in the last 35, 40 seconds to tie it. And that's a great win for Dave Aranda and the Bears. It's a bad loss for the ACC. It's one of the few good things about the week for the Big 12 as far as that goes, is we're talking about them trying to build a case to have more than one team in a playoff some years. So let's see, Ole Miss won at Kentucky, but I didn't think they looked very good doing it. But they needed to win after last year. Of course, they lost in Oxford to a bad Kentucky team. I'm not really sure what I think about either of those programs at the moment in terms of Ole Miss being type of playoff contender. We can overdo all this stuff, but I didn't. There's not a ton there that I'm gleaning from. They didn't look great. Let's put it that way. So, but a win's a win.
Yeah, I think anytime in major college football you win on the road, you at least can walk away going, "Hey, we won on the road." So for Baylor to do that at SMU was significant. And Ole Miss, Ole Miss has a lot to clean up. I mean, Kentucky's not a very good football team, and Kentucky could have won that game. And so I think the Ole Miss are going, "Hey, early in the season, we got to win on the road in conference. We're going to take that to the bank and get better."
All right. So let's talk about week 3 real quick. Just more like there's several games that are on tap that are pretty cool. Georgia at Tennessee would be, at least by the rankings, the marquee game. Georgia ranked, I'm looking here, 6th, and Tennessee ranked 15th in the AP poll. You mentioned earlier USF at Miami.
Yeah, it's a big game now.
Yeah, it is a big game. You wouldn't have thought so, but it's a big game. And then Texas A&M at Notre Dame is a great.
I'm interested in that. I think we're going to see a lot about either team. Like, is Notre Dame, and they lost to Miami, who might be very good. Is Notre Dame for real? And then Texas A&M, right? Some people pick them as a dark horse playoff team, out of the SEC. I think we're going to know a lot about, and if Notre Dame loses, they're out, right? I guess if anybody can lose 2 games and make it, it's Notre Dame, obviously.
Because of the helmet and the perception and all we were talking about?
I shouldn't say out. If Notre Dame loses, they have to be perfect and win by a lot of margin the next 10 games.
Yeah, I think that's right. Because they don't have the path that some of these others have in terms of winning a conference title and things like that. So, all right, Vanderbilt at South Carolina is an interesting game because Vandy looks like Vandy looks good again, and so we should probably get used to that. And then Clemson at Georgia Tech, which we mentioned earlier, that's one that I'm interested in.
Me too.
And really want to see what Georgia Tech has. And also, my evaluation of Clemson had gone up during the offseason like a lot of people's, but it's like maybe not. Who knows if they're really all that good? And so some great games to watch this week. Which one? All right, I know you're going to watch USF at Miami. That's your Miami's your team. Other than that, what's the one that you can't take your eyes away from?
Well, just regionally, Clemson, Georgia Tech is significant. I just want to see if Clemson is for real. I think you're going to know. I'm not trying to claim that Georgia Tech is Ohio State, but they're a well-coached, good football team. So, and it's in Atlanta. Not that's some kind of feared atmosphere, but they've beaten teams there. So I'm interested in that. And then I mentioned the Texas A&M game at Notre Dame. I think that's just going to tell us a lot. I think you might walk away going, okay, Notre Dame's going to be fine. They lost a game to a possibly top 5 team, and then they're going to be fine. Or you're going to go, wow, the Texas A&M hype might be real. Notre Dame went to Kyle Field and won last year.
Mm-hmm.
So those are the games. Georgia Tennessee just kind of is what it is. I don't get that. It's obviously a huge matchup in terms of rankings and hype, but I don't lose sleep over a matchup like that because I think that those two teams are pretty even, and whoever loses that game, it's not really going to matter at the end. They're both going to make the playoff if they win 10 games.
Well, that's the thing about that. This is just the truth with the 12-team playoff, and when they go to a 16-team playoff, it would be even more true. Is lose a game like this, especially early in the season. Yeah, well, this will be the third week, so a quarter of the way through a 12-game season. There's a lot of rehabbing that happens in those leagues, in the Big Ten and the SEC, especially the SEC, to where if you lose a game like this and then you go beat some people, you're going to play a bunch of opponents that are ranked at the time, and whether or not that means anything or not, I don't know, but people will think it means something. And so I am interested to see what Georgia has in terms of ability to throw the ball with Gunnar Stockton and things like that, because their aspirations are to win the whole thing, right? That's what they're there for.
And I'm a Georgia believer. I always am. I'm not going to go against Kirby Smart ever. I'm a full Georgia believer.
Listen, hey, I think, we'll find out more as things go along. That's why we talk. That's why we watch and everything else. But, it feels like this is wide open at this moment. And why can't it be Georgia, right? Why, if you're going to start, you start with the usual suspects. That's one of them that's always going to be there. But Josh Heupel, I think people weren't really sure what to think after the quarterback issue with Nico leaving. And, they actually look like, at least at the moment, they got the better of the trade. And so I'm looking forward to seeing what they can do. And I think my estimation of Josh Heupel as a head coach continues to go up. because
Yeah,
it really feels
yeah.
like
Oh,
he's got it going on.
and good quarterback play. They made quite the trade, at
Yeah,
QB.
Joey Aguilar end up right now seems like the better of them. So plenty of stuff to watch, and
It's gonna be
it'll
fun.
be
It's gonna be a fun
yeah,
weekend.
for sure. All right, we have talked a lot of college football as usual, and we need to go ahead and take a break, head into the locker room, come back for the second half, and we'll talk about faith. So, Gridiron and the Gospel of Faith in College Football podcast. We'll be right back right after this. And welcome back to the second half of Gridiron and the Gospel, a faith and college football podcast. I'm George Schroeder. He's Dean and Sarah. And the second half is our favorite segment. We talk about our shared faith in Jesus. And my favorite segment, which we are restarting today and will likely be a regular feature, is On My Heart, where we share something that's on our heart. And Dean, you're, especially if you guys are watching the YouTube podcast or the YouTube version of the podcast. And you can do that, by the way. So you can just look at go search Gridiron and the Gospel on YouTube. If you want to see us, you may not ever want to do it again. But if you want to see us, you're in an office somewhere in Missouri, an office of some sort. So tell us where you are, because
Yeah,
of course, it kind of flows into talking about what's on your heart.
sure. I am here in Bolivar, Missouri, on the campus of Southwest Baptist University. Go Bearcats!
One of my several alma maters,
That's
and which
right. Home
that's
of
right.
George Schroeder.
Well, not home of,
I
but
was looking for the
several members
statue.
of my family have been there. Yeah,
I
yeah.
was
There's
looking
no
for it.
statue there. They chased me out of town, rightly.
So I had a
But
chance to speak today to students, and I'm speaking to students for a leadership thing as well in the evening. And it's been a good visit here.
that's very cool. And so you spoke today to students. Was that actually? Did you just say that was in chapel, or was that a
Yeah, it
different
was
kind
in
of setting?
chapel, and I'm doing a
Okay.
leadership with their student leaders tonight. So at chapel today, I really encourage them about the mission of God. I told them, I quote that I one time asked our missions pastor at our church. Oftentimes we're talking about wins and logistics and being excited about stuff. And sometimes I was just curious. I said, "What's the most discouraging thing to you as a missions pastor?" And by missions pastor, for our listeners, he oversees anything that is missions at City Church, from sending people overseas to our trips. I also to locally, he's involved in that as well. But we try to send a lot of missionaries on short-term trips, long-term trips, career trips. He oversees all of that. So he said the most discouraging thing to me is that God clearly has a mission, and he said, frankly, too many Christians simply aren't on it.
Yeah, yeah,
And so I encourage the students to say that, hey, we need you to think first and foremost as a missionary. Like when you come to faith in Christ, you're signing up, not just signing up, but God himself is enlisting you. It's both and in his mission. So I told them about, or I walked them through what I called it famous last words, the sermon. And I talked to them about how last words are always significant in culture and civilization, how every word of the Bible is equally inspired and none is more important than the other because it's all the words of God, but emphasis matters as well. And we see in the book of Matthew, the book of Luke, the book of Acts, we see the last recorded words of Jesus by each of those authors, Luke for both of those books, Luke and Acts, and they're all in the context of mission,
hmm
in the context of this is what this has been all about. All the lessons you've learned, the things you see me do, it's all for this moment because you're being sent now. You're going to be empowered by the Spirit and you're sent. And that's not a coincidence because the first thing out of his mouth when he started his public ministry, we see in the book of Mark that he went and called two brothers and said, "Follow me and I'll make you fishers of men."
right.
That's what we're going to do. So he starts out publicly calling them to be fishers of men. And his last recorded words in those books of the New Testament are about that becoming a reality. So I encouraged them. I said, look, we need more Christian nurses on hospital floors and more Christians teaching elementary school. And we need more Christians coaching high school football, and we need more Christians who are selling real estate and who are designing architecture, on and on. We need Christians in every space, and we need to see ourselves as truly part of God's missions, to where a missions pastor could never say that God has a mission. And frankly, too many Christians just aren't on it.
Man, I love that. And here's the thing. We probably have among our listeners people in all of those vocations, and obviously other vocations as well, other careers. But so how do you, as a pastor or as a podcaster who's talking to college football fans who are presumably followers of Christ, some aren't, and we appreciate you guys being on here too. We want to tell you that Jesus is the most important piece of our lives. He's not a piece, he is our life. Colossians 3 says, when Christ, who is your life, appears, and that's who he is. But we've got people from all walks of life, and assuming they're followers of Christ, how does one embrace that idea and then turn their vocation? Because they're not pastors, right? And we have those guys too. But for those who are in non-pastoral, non-ministerial vocations, how do you turn that into mission? How does the high school football coach say, this is mission? I've got, this is my mission field. What are you, how does the rubber meet the road on that?
One of our church elders is a owner operator of Chick-fil-A's in Tallahassee. And even though it is Christian fast food, shout out to the Lord's Chicken, he likes to say, and it's very helpful, and I quote him a lot in sermons. I think he's just so helpful for mindset wise. He said a fundamental or foundational moment in his life was when he realized he didn't have to get a paycheck from a church in order to have a ministry. And I think that's just so profound and so important. That's like a light bulb that goes off, that wherever God has me, that is my ministry. It begins at home. Our families are ministry. But where you work, you're not just collecting a paycheck. Yes, you're called to provide for your family. Yes, you have to pay your bills. All those things are actually biblical principles of responsibility. But before anything else, you have a ministry. And ministry is about people. It's about God's glory and about people. So wherever you are, even if you're not the most people-driven person in the world, even if you're sitting in a cubicle all day and don't have as much interaction as you'd like, I want to encourage you to see every person you encounter as someone made in the image of God, someone who God loves, someone who needs to be forgiven of their sins by Jesus Christ. And my bare minimum hope, and this could be a goal for you, is that the people at work know you're a believer, right? Like they know you're an Oklahoma fan. They know if Michigan won or not the day before when you walk in the door. Oftentimes they may know your political persuasion, but do they know you're a believer in Jesus Christ and what that means for your life? So I think that's a kind of like bottom level question to ask is, do my coworkers know that I follow Jesus? And if the answer is no to that, well, there's your starting point, to make it known what it means to your faith. And then when you go, I like to tell folks to say yes to things. Our culture's become so obsessed with learning how to say no that we don't say yes enough anymore. So someone says, hey, do you want to go to lunch? Do you want to meet afterwards? Do you want to go? Try to say yes whenever you can. Just to go find with people, get to know them, invite them into your life, ask them questions about themselves. And I would hope as they're getting to know you, that your faith's a foundational part of what it means to get to know you. So I think it's just rethinking our approach. It's that, no, yes, I work for this company, but before I work for anyone else, I work for the Lord. And I do my work unto the Lord. And that's not a private matter, right? It's a public matter of faith in Christ. So that's my encouragement to our listeners out there, is that if they know that, you're a Tennessee fan at work, I would hope they know you're a Christian. It's great they know you're a Tennessee fan. That's part of the fun. God gives us things to enjoy. That's why we talk about college football. The only thing that's not good is polls. Polls are not good. But before October 1st. But we have a ministry, and we make sure you're a part of it and that you're on it.
Hey, if look, if the only thing they know about you is that you're an OU fan or a Tennessee fan or a Florida State fan, and you're a Christ follower listening to this, you have missed the boat. Now, listen, don't hear me being condemning. Hear me saying, encouraging you. Just, if Jesus means everything to you, people need to see him in you and know that about you. And he needs to be something that flows out of you as you talk and in your conversations. And they need to know that. And I would just say this, at some point, my hope is that would be the first thing they know about you, is that he is everything. And I am a Christ follower who happens to be a, whatever team it is, fan. But start. I love how you said just start. The bare minimum is, do they know that you follow Jesus? And so I love that. And one of the things you said is see people for who they are. And it makes me think of Matthew 9 when Jesus saw the crowds, and crowds were all around him all the time, right? But he saw the crowds, and it says when he saw the crowds in Matthew 9 verse 36, he felt compassion for them because they were distressed and dejected, or harassed and helpless, right? And the idea is mangled, thrown down, unable to get up. They were distressed and dejected. They were like sheep without a shepherd. And he felt compassion. And so just say, Lord, help me see my coworkers, my fellow students, the other coaches, the players that I'm coaching, the employees that I have, my boss, whoever it is, like you see them, because they're lost, many of them, like sheep without a shepherd. They don't even know what they're searching for. Most of them aren't searching for Christ, but that's what they need.
Yes.
And that's who they need.
And it's our greatest need still. Past tense, yes, we need to be forgiven, but not to live this life. It's our greatest need. So I would just hope, and think about it, George, like how far it spreads that people know about you at work. Like if you love to golf, they know it. If you're excited for hunting season, they know it. If you're a grandpa, they know it, right? Like, because you look at my picture, look at the grandkids, things you're sharing on Facebook, Instagram, whatever. Like, do they know that you follow Jesus? And I would hope that'd be the first question we ask about our approach.
No, completely right. And then I think what follows from that is, if they know you follow Jesus, does your life show
Yeah.
what a Jesus follower ought to be, right? You don't want them to go, that guy says he knows Jesus, but he acts just like the rest of us, or he's a bad guy who does this, that, or the other, right? You don't want that. Are you growing in him, and can they see that about you? And then are you telling them about him? But yeah, let me encourage you. I figure everybody on this who listens is, other than our moms, is a college football fan, right? That's who listens to this podcast. So you're listening and you're grinding your teeth at something I said or Dean said about your program, or you're nodding along because we're happy with how your team is doing, and you're having a great time, and so you've looked forward to this time of year, right? And everybody knows it. This is something you just said. Man, let me just say this. Does everybody know how excited and encouraged you are every day because you are following Jesus, because he saved you, he redeemed you? That's my prayer. I mean, think about that. And my challenge to you would be also is, ask the Lord to help you see those people like he sees them. So, man, I love that. I love the fact that you get a chance to share sometimes in chapel to college students and stuff like that. I love the fact that you got to see Bolivar. And apparently the town and the university have recovered since my time there, which is good.
And just down the road from Missouri State, who is now FBS, Conference USA.
Yeah, I mean, that's another topic for another day, about how everybody wants to be FBS, and we've kind of stratified this thing so much that it doesn't really matter unless you're in the one of the Power 4 leagues. And really, we're almost to the point where it kind of matters about the Power 2, but the Power 4 leagues, and below that, there's a whole lot of, really, they're FBS? Okay, why?
Yeah, why?
No offense to the Bears of Missouri State, but it's just, why? What good does that do
Formerly
you?
coached by Bobby Petrino.
Formerly, that's right. So, yeah, man, so much to talk about. By the way, Arkansas at Ole Miss is an interesting one this week. Speaking of teams once head coached by Bobby Petrino, and obviously now running the offense. So just be interesting to see where what happens with that. But hey, we can't help talking about college football. You can tell that, right? So, all right. Well, look, I'd love to talk some more about this, and I've got a couple of thoughts that I'd like to inject. But next week, I'll bring something from my heart that's on my heart, and I look forward to talking more with you too, Dean. I know you've got a jam-packed afternoon schedule and evening schedule before you then go back home to Florida. So we ought to wrap this thing up. Hey, y'all, if you would email us, if something we've said in football, or especially on the faith side, has triggered something for you, email us at gridirongospelpod@gmail.com, gridirongospelpod@gmail.com. And you can reach out on Twitter. My handle is at George Schroeder, just the name, and his is at Dean in Sarah, just the name. Feel free to do that. And you can visit us online at gridironthegospel.com. You can find us on any of the major podcast platforms, or on YouTube if you really want to see our faces. We're going to try to smile some and look at the camera and do some things we don't normally do, the smiling part of it, that is. And we'd love to have you. But be sure to rate, review, and subscribe in your favorite podcast app. And we look forward to seeing you next week for more Gridiron in the Gospel, a faith and college football podcast.